and allowed all sects religious freedom. In the court of Saifullah, Isa Ragi was there and used to translate from Saraik into Arabic many books. In Andalus, that is Spain, Abdul Rahman Nasir was a great supporter of translation of the books of Sassanids, and he also got many books translated into Arabic from Greek. And he provided wealth of knowledge from Pahlavi language in form of those books. And it was because of this fact that Shahnameh-Firdausi was written in that light. In India, Sultan Feroz Shah went to see Jawala Mukhi mountain in 772 AH. He came to know about the presence of 1300 Sanskrit books in an idol house, and he got those books procured and got those translated. One book on astronomy was translated in a versified form and was named as Dalail-e-Ferozi. These books were mostly on music and wrestling. So you can understand that books even on music and wrestling got translated in India also. People don't know much about this. And they know only that Mughals came and they just destroyed the temples, and then they looted the wealth, and they did not do anything for the betterment of the people, or they did not improve upon there was no improvement in the condition so far as academics is concerned, teaching is concerned, learning is concerned. But this is totally wrong, and we need to just try to combat such type of positions which people have taken. These books were basically on music, and these were on wrestling, and still they were being published and translated. Abdul Qadir says in Muntakhab al-Tawarikh that when in 1000 AH he saw these books in Lahore. Akbar had a lot, and he saw these books even in 1000 years. These books were intact till his time. And in Lahore and other places, these books could be found. Akbar had a lot of interest in Sanskrit books. This job was mostly done by Baramukhs. The ancestor of this group was a man of Balakh, who was the custodian of a Zoroastrian temple, that is fire temple. And even the people from Zoroastrian religion were also employed for this job. And Muslims never abhorred any knowledge which was coming from any side, from any group. When Muslims came to India, as has been mentioned by Babar in his Tuzki, in his Baburnama, he found small horses and many such type of things in India which were not up to the mark. Then he changed all these things with the best race of the horses, and he brought agriculture, and he brought other arts and crafts from many countries, and he sent some people to Iran and China to teach the people of India many arts. Abu Mashar Falaki remained in India for 7 years and learned Sanskrit and read books in Sanskrit also. Al-Biruni remained in India for 16 years and wrote book on the customs and the beliefs of Hindus. Feroz Shah got the Indian books translated. Akbar also showed a lot of interest in these books. The Prince Dhanal had fascination towards Hindi language. Azad Bilgrami wrote articles on Hindu subjects. Qasim Farishta wrote Ikhtiyaratul Qasimi and highlighted Hindu medicine in Persian language. Hundreds of years before Akbar, Zainul Abidin of Kashmir translated Sanskrit books and lifted jizya from Hindus and banned slaughtering of the cows. It was not only Akbar to allow Hindus to have a role in the administration and the government affairs. It was basically Ibrahim Adil Shah, who was famous king of Deccan and lived about 20 years before Akbar and settled on throne on 943 AH, and he had handed over all the affairs of his rule in the hands of Hindus. Even he changed official language from Persian to Hindi, as Firishta has written about him. He was not only liberal like Akbar, rather he was a religious man and very pious, and he was earlier Shia, and then he adopted the Hanafite school, but he was giving the Hindus free hand so far as administration is concerned. The excellence of India became religiously important and found its place even in Hadith and Tafsir, as Azad Bilgrami has mentioned in the prelude of his Ghazl on al-Hind. Jalaluddin Suyuti had attributed a saying to Hazrat Ali in Dur Mansur narrating from Ibn Jarir, Hakim, Bahiki, and Ibn Asakir that the best air is the air of India, and also that Adam left paradise for India and brought along with him the air from the fragrance from the paradise. Though these narrations are fabricated, but Azad Birgami says these show how much Muslims valued India. And even before that, Birgami had said that the wisdom and the book writing has started taking place in India. And he quotes from Ali Rumi's book, that is Mahazaratul Awail, and Mullah Bihari, who have said that the Brahmins living in the mountains of south, they were knowing hymns through which many language could be known. So you can understand that what was their perception about India and the Brahmins and the communities living in India. And these things need to be highlighted more and more so that the misconceptions about the Muslim rulers can be changed. Now coming to now the actual subject, which I just want to talk to you and about which some people have already mentioned many facts. Following the foundation of the Islamic State at Medina, the charter, that is Misak Medina, that Muhammad ﷺ gave to the citizens of the newly founded state was not merely a treaty of alliance, but a written constitution, as has been mentioned by Dr. Hamidullah, that this was the first written constitution, defining the rights and obligations of the citizens and subjects of the new polity. It granted to the citizens and subjects alike the liberty of thought, conscience, equity, and fraternity, irrespective of their caste, color, creed, or social status. It was a time when the Christians still preached the doctrine that man is born sinful and that Jesus Christ had sacrificed himself for the atonement of Christians. In view of the above statements, we have to examine first the concept of dhimma in Islam and the nominal obligations imposed on the non-Muslims. Next, we shall proceed to discuss the rights of zimmis or non-Muslim minorities in an Islamic state. The concept of zimma and zimmi, non-Muslim citizens of the Islamic states whose protection is guaranteed by the state, as well as individual Muslims, are called zimmis. The term zimma or al zimma means those Christians, Jews, and others who are to live in Darul Islam under the protection of Muslim Ummah, subject to rendering military services or in lieu thereof a nominal obligation payment of jizya. Muslim jurists hold that protection can be given to all in the Darul Islam, save the idolaters of Arab, as Prophet ﷺ himself gave protection to the Magians of Hajar by realizing jizya from them, so that they are also treated at par with the men of book, Ahlul Kitab. In the writings of Muslim jurists like Abu Bakr Jassas, Aqawul Quran, and Qasani, these all matters have been mentioned fully. The acceptance of jizya from the Magians of Hajar implies that it can be exacted from the polytheists of the state as well. According to Balazari, the Prophet exacted it from the Magians of Hahar, Umar took it from the Persians, and Usman from the Berbers of Africa. The non-acceptance of jizya from the Arab idolaters by the Prophet seems to be due to the fact that by that time the revelations regarding jizya had not been received. Had any of the idolaters remained outside the orbit of Islam after the revelations about jizya, the Prophet ﷺ would have accepted it from them too, and they would have become the zimmi of Islamic State. It is noteworthy that the concept of zimma and zimmi emerged only after the conquest of Makkah, which took place in the year 8 AH. Prior to that, the agreements entered into between the Prophet and the polytheists were pacts of mutual help and cooperation. Hence, they were neither the protected people, Ahlul Zimma, nor any law of the Islamic State could be applied to them. This is warranted by the fact that the injunctions regarding jizya were received by the Prophet only in the year 9 AH, that is to say, only after the conquest of Makkah. The imposition of jizya on the non-Muslim subjects of the Islamic State has been differently interpreted by the Muslim jurists. The general view that can fairly be guessed from the writings of the jurists is that jizya is imposed upon the non-Muslims as a badge of humiliation for their unbelief or by way of mercy for the protection given to them by the Islamic State. Some consider it as a mark of punishment for their unbelief because of their continuous stay in the Darul Islam, which is a crime. Hence, they have no escape from being humiliated through the imposition of tax. This is also a view of some scholars like Sarkshi and others, and especially Mawardi. Others contend that protection is given to non-Muslims with a view that they may mix up with the Muslim population, adopt their good qualities, and ultimately embrace Islam. This is also the view of some, jurists. However, there was an economic motive behind the imposition of jizya on non-Muslims, they insist. Commenting on the various theories of jizya by the classical jurists, a scholar of the present age says that the Quranic verse 9:29 regarding jizya has been understood in compact literal sense without taking it into its historical perspective. Perhaps it is due to this misunderstanding. He adds that jurists and exegetes consider jizya as a mark of degradation for the non-Muslims in Islam, and infer corollaries reflective of the humiliation. And this point has been mentioned by Ziauddin Ahmad, the concept of jizya in early Islam. It appears as if these jurists, in making far-fetched theories about the term Sagirun used in the Quran, Surah Toba, and upon which they constructed their theories, have suggested such provisions as are probably contrary to the facts and certainly opposite the very ethics of Islamic law and Islam itself. A close study of the early history of jizya, particularly since its imposition by the Prophet till date in the period of the Khulafa Rashidin, will reveal that it was an obligation through the payment of which non-Muslim citizens of the state were exempted from rendering military services, and through which they were expected to pay allegiance to the political authority of Islam. There is nothing to prove that it was imposed just to humiliate the non-Muslims or to make them socially degraded. Had it been so, then women, children, monks, unemployed, blind, sick, and crippled would never have been exempted from the payment of jizya. The categories of persons mentioned above were not only exempted from jizya, but were also given stipends from the state treasury as and when needy were detected. There are living examples of return of jizya to non-Muslims by the Muslim generals when they found themselves unable to protect them against their enemies because of their engagement in the war. So you can understand that it was not because of showing the, I should say, unfriendly attitude towards the non-Muslims because they were paying jizya, but it was for their protection, and they were exempted from the military services, and there was no other motive behind this, as has been mentioned by some of the scholars or the jurists. It is to be observed that jizya has been misunderstood as a discriminatory tax, making an invidious distinction among the students of the Islamic State. This charge is perhaps based on ignorance of the Islamic polity. And we can understand that its payment entitled them to reap the fruit of almost all rights and privileges in the state and at par with the Muslim subjects. To put it into other words, non-Muslims owed their loyalty to the state through the payment of this tax or rendering military service, and enjoyed the rights and unfolding of themselves, which is the other side of that loyalty. With the above preliminary discussion about the concept of zimmi, the nature of jizya and its payment, we shall now discuss the rights and states of non-Muslim, the Islamic State. And there are many, rights they had. Some of these have been discussed. For example, they have their liberty according to Islam, and they can have their freedom of conscience, civil liberties, and civil rights they had, and those recognized claimed in the state which enabled them to lead a decent and honorable life in the society, and which provide them with opportunities to seek happiness and develop their personality. And again, it is through civil rights that citizens of the state attain the highest goals in civilized society. And these rights were given to non-Muslims by Islam. Islam grants and protects the right to life and honor to every individual, regardless of one's creed or color. color. According to the Quran, he who deprived another from his life without lawful authority and just cause is regarded as the one who has killed humanity at large. Allah does not like injustice or wrong to his creations. It has mentioned in the Quran. Islam regards the life of Zimmi as sacred as that of a Muslim. He cannot be deprived of his right to life save in accordance with the law of the state. Dur Mukhtar, it has been mentioned by the jurist books also. If a non-Muslim suffers like the loss of life or property at the hands of a Muslim, the latter will be dealt with in accordance with the law, and he will have to make good for that. Just as a Muslim cannot do wrong or injustice to his fellow being, similarly, he can't do that to a non-Muslim. This has been mentioned by Aini, Umdatul Qari, Shara Sahih Bukhari. A prophetic tradition is quoted in this regard: he who wrongs a man to whom a covenant has been given or burdens him above his capacity, I shall advocate against him on the day of judgment, says the Prophet ﷺ. A Muslim can neither torture a non-Muslim nor can he insult him in any way. The Prophet is reported to have said, he who tortures a Zimmi is like the one who has counteracted him. The Prophet ﷺ. I shall counteracted against him, he who tortures a Zimmi on the day of judgment. And he said, I shall counteract against him, he who tortures a Zimmi on the day of judgment. Who has counteracted him, I will counteract against him. Jurists of different schools of thought agree that it is the responsibility of all the Muslims to protect the rights of Muslim minorities and to see that none of them is wrong. The reason is that after coming under the protection of Islam, they now belong to the Dar Islam. They shall enjoy the privileges granted by Islam. In this connection, a statement ascribed to Hazrat Ali is worth mentioning. He is reported to have once said, the Zimmis give jizya to us generously so that their wealth become like that of ours and their blood like our blood. Ibn Qudama. It must be noted here that Muslim jurists not only remained contented with that they theorized about the rights of the non-Muslims, but when they saw something wrong done to the non-Muslims, they warned the rulers, reminding them of the obligations Islam had imposed on them in connection with the rights of non-Muslim minorities. For example, when one Abbasid Salih bin Ali, Abdullah bin Abbas banished some al-Dhimma from the hill tracts of Lebanon because some of them had indulged themselves in subversive activities against the state. Imam Awza'i condemned the action of the ruler for his maltreatment of all the Zimmis. And we can find the details of this in Blazari. As said earlier, Muslim generals returned jizya to their non-Muslim subjects in case they felt that due to military operations against their enemies, they would not be in a position to protect them. Muslim generals and other responsible leaders scrupulously adhered to the injunctions of the Sharia regarding the rights of non-Muslim minorities in the Dar Islam. Even if it is supposed for the time being that some one ill-treated non-Muslims, that cannot be ascribed to Islam. The failings of a person or group of persons only superficially professing a religion itself will not make Islam responsible for his or her actions. Islam allows its non-Muslim minorities the freedom of the movement and profession. They can move anywhere they like and settle anywhere they please, subject to certain restrictions. One such restriction is that they cannot enter the sacred places of Muslims, that is Haramain. They may visit the holy cities of Muslims but cannot settle there permanently. So these are some restrictions which every government just imposes on its citizens. Such were the restrictions imposed by Muslims as well. And we have details about this in many books like Shawqani's Nail al-Awtad and Radul Mukhtar and Dur Mukhtar, and then Sharat Tanwir al-Absar al-Matba al-Usmaniya, which has been published there. As non-Muslims do not believe in the theology of Islam, so naturally they would not go to such places or cities and settle there. On the part of the Islamic State, these are precautionary measures only. Such restrictions are also necessary from the law and order point of view, because if non-Muslims enter the sanctuaries of Muslims and something unusual happens, it will injure the feelings of one another and jeopardize their cordial relations. So it is in a sense for their own benefit as well, so that no, I should say, no bad faith takes place among the communities. Just as non-Muslims have been given the right to freely move in their country subject to the common law of the land, similarly, they also are permitted to visit foreign countries in connection with their business activities subject to certain conditions common for all. Outside the state too, they are the zimma of the Muslims and the Islamic states. So if anything happens to them, then Islamic State will take cognizance. They are, however, not allowed to visit a state or states hostile to the Islamic State. If a zimmi falls captive at the hands of a foreign state, Islam imposes a duty on the rulers of the Islamic State and the Muslims to leave no stone unturned for the release and safe return of such a non-Muslim to his home. His ransom money may also be paid from the public exchequer if he is not in a position to pay the dues. So this has been mentioned by Ibn Qudama and Shawqani in his Nail al-Awtar. And Islam grants and protects the right to education and property and profession to its non-Muslim minorities in accordance with their own belief system. Their services may also be utilized in educating the Muslims. Those prisoners of war in the Battle of Badr, as we know, who were not in a position to pay their ransom money, were asked to educate their children of Muslims. And they educated 10 students of the Ansar. They are allowed to cling to their ancient culture patterns and preserve their native language. Moreover, they may adopt any profession in Islamic history in such lucrative occupations as banking, medical profession, and such other professions also. Non-Muslims have been well represented and firmly established like it is Muslim citizens. The Islamic State guarantees to their non-Muslim citizens their right to family and its secrecy. No one can enter their abodes without their permission. This right of zimmis is based on textual injections of Quran, which are as much valid for the non-Muslims as for the Muslim citizens. Likewise, non-Muslims have been given a choice to get their civil cases decided either according to the Islamic law or according to their own personal laws. According to Fatawa Alamgiri, the zimmis are not subject to the Tashri' law of Islam. Legal relations among themselves shall be governed by the law of their own religion. History is replete with the instances when the non-Muslim brought their disputes for settlement before the early rulers of the Islamic State, which they decided according to the personal laws of the non-Muslims. However, in punishing the crimes against humanity, such as adultery, murder, theft, robbery, assault, etc., the same law was applicable to all and sundry in the Islamic State. Religious rights and liberty to non-Muslims. Non-Muslims in an Islamic State can freely practice their own belief system. Actually, when the Quran inculcates the necessity for jihad, it mentions the protection of other religions before the protection of Islam itself. The order in which the protection of the place of worship is mentioned in the Quran is worth noticing and is very significant to appreciate the spirit of Islam and its philosophy of war. The Quran says, quote, "Had there not been Allah's repelling some people by others, certainly there would have been pulled down cloisters and churches and synagogues and the mosques in which Allah's name is much remembered." In the above verse, the worship place of Muslims' mosque is mentioned last and not first. This shows how much importance has been attached to the rights of freedom of worship and freedom of conscience, the rights from which so many other civil rights and liberties flow. Islam does not impose its own way of life or faith on others, for according to the teaching of the Quran, there is no compulsion in deen, la ikrah fi deen. However, this does not mean that Muslims should not preach Islam. Muslims may invite non-Muslims to the fold of Islam, but in a decent, cultured, and behaving manner. They are, however, forbidden to compel others to embrace Islam. It follows that non-Muslim minorities of the Islamic State can freely and fearlessly perform their religious ceremonies in places of their worship. It is explicitly forbidden in the Tashri law of Islam to demolish or discredit the place of the worship of non-Muslims. The presence of their churches and synagogues in cities of the early Islamic State implies the ijma of the Muslim Ummah to the effect that non-Muslims should have their places of their worship in the Dar al-Islam, and that they must be protected from encroachment by others. Al-Mughni. They are permitted to construct their churches and synagogues in cities other than those constructed by Muslims. Al-Kasani. They are also permitted to construct places of the worship in cities where they are in minority or majority. In Muslim majority towns, the point of constructing new churches and synagogues is controversial. Some told that they can construct, as Sarakshi has said, while others contend that they cannot construct the places of their worship in such towns. Dur Mukhtar. There is, however, consensus of opinion among the Muslim jurists to the effect that they cannot construct their churches or synagogues in Hijaz or its vicinity. Likewise, non-Muslims are allowed to perform their rituals within the places of their worship in towns where they are in majority. They may also perform their religious functions outside their churches and synagogues. They have also been given the liberty to beat their trumpets for religious ends any time in the day or night. However, during prayer times of Muslims, they are not permitted to do so. And of course, they must not do so. Abu Yusuf in his Kitab al-Kharaj has mentioned this fact. In fact, in safeguarding the rights of non-Muslims, Islam has given them such liberal concessions as to give them the liberty of maintaining even those practices which are forbidden to Muslims. For example, the consumption of intoxicants is forbidden to Muslims, but the non-Muslims have the liberty not only of consumption, but also of its manufacture, important sales subjects to certain conditions. As I have already mentioned, that Abu Yusuf says in his Kitab al-Kharaj that if a Muslim breaks the bottle of wine of a non-Muslim, he has to pay the ransom for that. Non-Muslims of the Islamic State enjoyed their religious rights and liberties not only in the formative periods of Islamic State, but in later ages as well, when liberal consciences were given to them in this respect. It is important to note that Umayyad Caliph Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who himself wondered why so much religious liberties had been given to non-Muslims by his predecessors, once inquired the learned scholar of the day, Hassan al-Basri, about this. The answer of the latter was that the status given to them in the state was in lieu of the jizya exacted from them, and advised the Caliph to keep firm what is his predecessors had done in their respect. Economic rights and liberties also mean freedom of earning decent and sufficient economic earnings, and also freedom from fear of unemployment or loss of economic income. It also means security and the opportunity to find reasonable significance in the earning of one's daily bread. Actually, economic rights and liberties are preconditions of other rights and liberties. None of them can really exist without them. An individual cannot be really free if hunger and he faces other problems. And in this way, non-Muslim minorities in this respect will be provided many securities. And it should be added that equal opportunities to non-Muslims will be also given in the economic field, and they will be given also freedom to choose any type of profession. Riba, which is usually which is prohibited for all and sundry in the Islamic State, that will be also prohibited for them. The most important point to be noted here is that if any of the non-Muslims becomes destitute, crippled, or sick, he has much claims on the state treasury as other Muslims. Muslim generals have not only given such undertakings to the Zimmis at the time of granting them citizenship of the Islamic State, but the early rulers of the Islamic State are also reported to have sanctioned huge sums to the deserving persons from among the non-Muslims from the public treasury, that is Baitul Mal of the state. It must be mentioned here that there is no bar on the trade activities of the non-Muslims in an Islamic State, save subject to certain legal restrictions referred to in the preceding sections, as I have mentioned. Political rights and privileges of non-Muslims. Political rights are all those recognized rights of the stance by dint of which they are enabled to take part in the affairs of the government. And I have already mentioned how much, a role the non-Muslims have played in the Islamic politics at many places. And they will be just fit also for the political office for which he is fit, then a Muslim is not fit, and they will given that. Nor of course, a non-Muslim can be overburdened with such responsibility, because political, so in the Sharia are not rights. So, but in case of Sharia matters, they will not be given any responsibility, but other matters they will be given, responsibilities. They are there are obligations and burden which are imposed only on those who are capable to shoulder such responsibilities pertaining to Sharia, and non-Muslims will be exempted from those services. Since Islamic State is basically an ideological one, hence only those persons are to be entrusted with its key administrative positions who believe in its ideology. Hence, non-Muslims in principle can neither be entrusted with the responsibility of the office of the head of the state, nor can they take part in the election of the selection. The reason is that rule, according to Muslim jurists, is established to defend the faith and administer the day-to-day business of the state. And the religious nature of head of the state alone and nothing else prevents non-Muslims either to hold it or take part in the legislation through election selection. But this does not mean that Islam taboos the utilization of non-Muslims in the service of the state. This only means that while availing the services of the non-Muslims, due care should be taken that the Islamic character of the state is not compromised and the ideological demands are not sacrificed at the altar of the so-called tolerance. However, in modern times, when most of the Muslim states have become secular in nature, there should be no reason to deter a non-Muslim from taking part in the election of the head of the state, etc. But in the classical state that actually existed, or the one depicted by the Muslim jurists, no such concession could be given in the name of mere tolerance. Before considering the political rights of non-Muslims, we must pause here to consider the misgivings of some modern writers through their assertion. Yeah?
Please conclude, because the time is...
Yeah. And after discussing these all matters with evidences from various books of the jurists, when we see the condition of non-Muslims in Muslim countries nowadays, and I was just seeing Khalid Mahmood's book and article on the condition of non-Muslims in the neighboring country, and he had himself lamented that all these rights given to non-Muslims by Islam are not being taken care of by the Muslim governments and the individuals as well. In the same way, in many Muslim countries, the non-Muslims are not feeling secure, and sometimes even Muslims don't feel secure there, and then they visit to other countries, non-Muslim countries, for asylum. And as Ibn Ashura has rightly said, many countries of the West have become nowadays Darul Aman or Darul Mahida. Then the Muslim countries, because in many Muslim countries, even Muslims are not secure, what to say of non-Muslims. And this is not because of Islam, it is because of the ignorance of the rulers or not following the injunctions of Islam, which are there for in respect of the non-Muslims. So in this way, where the Christians or the Hindus or the Jains, especially in different parts of the world, Sindh and other places, are being discriminated, it is because of the ignorance of the people or the negligence of the rulers that these episodes are taking place. And these all episodes are giving bad name and allowing the non-Muslim enemies of Islam to just tarnish the image of Islam so far as the rights of minorities is concerned. Well, as we find during the time of the Mughals, there were such good relations among the Muslims and non-Muslims that the foundation of the Golden Temple was laid down by Mir Qadri in Amritsar. So such was the good relationship among these communities. But later on, it was also because of some misgivings of Muslims themselves, and also the propaganda of the Britishers against Muslims and their rule in India and other parts of the world, that a lot of mistrust has been created, and people think that Islam was imposed on non-Muslims by force, while as it can be easily shown that this was because of the preaching of Islam peacefully and by the Sufis and by the missionaries of Islam, that Islam came to many parts of Indonesia and India and Central Asia and Europe as well. It was not by force, but by persuasion, by dawah, and by inviting to the way of Allah in a beautiful manner, as has been mentioned by preaching of Islam by Arnold and other scholars, and also by Brepolt in his Making of Humanity, that Islam was preached in the world by the peaceful way, not by force or coercion. And the Muslims who were there in Muslim countries where the Islamic State was, so non-Muslims were getting influenced by the character of Muslims and by behavior, and not under any coercion. And I have mentioned it at a seminar where there were many non-Muslim friends in Mumbai, that had the Mughals or other kings used force to convert their subjects to Islam, there would have been not the there would have been a majority of Muslims in India and other parts. And we know that it was just by persuasion, and Muslim rulers and Islamic State had given their fullest rights to non-Muslims, and even 1/10 of that has not been given by modern so-called Western liberal societies and governments. So in this way, we can say that in Islamic State, the non-Muslims have been given all the rights, and especially so far as educational field is concerned, Muslims have availed their services in the early days, and they were employed as the translators of the Greek books and treasures of knowledge of science and philosophy and technology into Arabic. And they were also given the government jobs, and they were also given such type of offices which were very crucial in India, in Central Asia, in Baghdad, and even in during the time of Hazrat Umar, Hazrat Umayyah, as I have mentioned all these matters. And especially there was a special relationship of Muslims with the Christians, because Quran has said that Christians are very close to Muslims in love, akraba mawda. And for that reason, you can find that in Spain, the Christians were given a lot of privileges and rights, and even Jews, and that has been even acknowledged by many Jewish and Christian scholars. And they have said that in the West they are not getting those rights now as they used to get under the rule of Muslims in Spain and other Western parts of Islamic world. And as I have mentioned, that there was full freedom of religion, and even every person was free to prove his religion and against Islam even in many ways, as I have mentioned about the court of Mansur Abbasi that was full of such scholars, and they were just proving their religion in contrast to Islam, and there was good debate, and there was a totally liberal attitude of their rulers and the caliphs towards their debates, and they themselves used to meet the scholars belonging to other religions. And about Jahangir, it has been said that he used to go to see some scholars of the Sanskrit and Brahmins and learn from them. And even Akbar used to take Brahmin scholars to his own court and to his own private room and discuss with them many matters. And it was case with other Muslim rulers and kings also, and they were never intolerant towards other religious people and religious communities. Rather, they tried their level best to protect them and serve them, and it was because of that reason they were tolerated and they were respected, and they made those countries which they ruled their own abode. They did not loot those countries as the Britishers did and then left for their own country, but they stayed there where they had ruled, and people were loving them, and because of that love they could rule for hundreds of years, and they had just earned the I should say the confidence of their subjects. And I will end with this episode of a scholar from Britain who had come to the Patiala conference of Indian History Congress, and he said that even after the death of the Mughal kings, their monuments are giving the revenue to the country much more.
Professor Marazi sir, please conclude.
Yeah, now I am concluding, and I am concluding with this set. So their contribution has been much more so far as the safeguard of the political, economic, educational, and religious rights were concerned. With these words, I once again thank you all for your rapt attention and giving me chance to speak on this very crucial topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Marazi Saab, for such a wonderful lecture. There are some questions for you in the question and answer section. If you can see them, otherwise I will read it.
You see, because I am not able to see from here.
Okay. There is one question: position of Islamic State on religious holidays of non-Muslim subjects. And another question in the same context is, kindly comment on the views expressed by some scholars that non-Muslims cannot be full citizens, under bracket, only protected minorities of Islamic State, and they cannot be given sensitive posts in army, legislation, etc.
These are very good questions, and I have already tried to explain one of the earlier questions that their religious festivals or their religious duties, whether they can perform or not. So I have shown that they can do these all things, and if but they have been told that they should not interfere in the affairs of Muslims, especially when there is a prayer time. At that time, they will not just perform those things which are going to disturb Muslim, the people who are going for prayer. Otherwise, they are free to perform all their religious rites and duties, and also participate in their festivals and also in their ceremonies. And even government and the Muslims will support them if they are lacking somewhere in these aspects. And so far as the second question is concerned, that as I have already mentioned, especially in the context of Indian subcontinent, that they were given very important positions. And even as I have talked about Ibrahim Adil, that he had handed over all the political affairs to the non-Muslims and Hindus and the Brahmins. And even he had changed the language from Persian to Hindi in order to just accommodate these non-Muslims in his government. So, but as I have mentioned, that there are, if the Islamic State is based on ideology, so there are some positions which are reserved for Muslims only. For example, implementation of Sharia, and also Amar bil Maruf and Nahi Munkar. But so far as other duties are concerned, and so far as army duty is concerned, so they have been exempted from this duty because they have to be given protection. And if Muslims have been not able to give the protection, then they did not exact this jizya money from them, and then they just left them and they said, we are not able to protect you. So to protect the non-Muslims from onslaught from any side, so they have been exempted from their military services. But in some cases, their services have been also utilized by Muslim rulers, as we find in Indian subcontinent, that their services were utilized by Muslims. And in other cases also, they have been given other very important positions, as I have mentioned about Hazrat Umar and also about Hazrat Muawiyah, that some of his secretaries, they were non-Muslims, and they have been given some important positions also, but not the sensitive positions where the ideological foundations of Islam may be sometimes a danger. And it is not possible for a non-believer who does not believe in that ideology to defend that faith in such a way as a person who believes or belongs to that faith can defend. So there are reasons, and in all ideological societies or states, such type of things are taken care of, and no one is allowed to just be at the helm of affairs so far as army affairs are concerned or the political affairs are concerned, but other professions were free for them. And as I mentioned, in modern times, when Muslim states have become secular, so it has been said by the ulama that they can be given chance to go for election and contest elections. Some more questions?
There is one more question. It is in Urdu. गैर मुस्लिम को तालीम देकर उजरत लेना चाहिए या नहीं, या गैर मुस्लिम को इल्म और हुनर सिखाकर पैसा कमाना कैसा है?
देखिए, अगर खुदा न खास्ता वो गैर मुस्लिम गरीब है और वो मोहताज है, तो उसकी तालीम का फर्ज भी मुसलमानों पर आयद होता है, और मुसलमानों ने कभी उस चीज़ से उनको महरूम नहीं रखा। आप बल्कि मैं ये कहूँगा आपको कि जो मुसलमानों को तालीम देने वाले भी अक्सर बेशतर गैर मुस्लिम ही थे। यानी इतना उनको प्रिविलेज था कि न कि वो अपनी तालीम जारी रख सकते थे, बल्कि उनकी तालीम इतनी ज़्यादा थी, वो पढ़ने लिखने में इतने वेल वर्स्ड थे कि वो मुसलमानों को तालीम देते थे, और मुसलमानों ने कभी उसे एतराज़ नहीं किया कि उनसे ही सीखे। तो उसी तरह से अगर कहीं पर कोई गैर मुस्लिम जो है वो मफलूकुल हाल हो, उसके पास गुंजाइश ना हो पढ़ने के लिए, तो ये मुसलमानों का फर्ज बनता है कि वो उस पर पैसा खर्च कर सकते हैं। और ये जो है, मैंने इस पे जो है ज़कात पर भी लिखा था कुछ, तो उसमें आप देखिए कि ये जो इब्न सबील के लिहाज से या फी सबीलिल्लाह या मुअल्लफ़तुल क़ुलूब में ये चीज़ आएगी कि अगर हम उनको तालीम दे देंगे तो एक मद जो है ज़कात में मुअल्लफ़तुल क़ुलूब के लिए। और तालीम से बड़ी चीज़ क्या हो सकती है कि लोगों की तालीम कल्ब की जाए और उनके दिलों को जो है नरम किया जाए। तो इसलिए, और ये भी कुरान कहता है कि हत्ता यस्मा कलाम अल्लाह, अगर कोई मुश्रिक आपके पास या रसूल आए और उसको आप पनाह दे दीजिए ताकि वो अल्लाह का कलाम सुने। तो मालूम हुआ कि उनको सुनाना है, इस्लाम की जो भी तालीम है उनको सुनाना है। इसलिए वो तभी तो सुनेंगे ना जब उनको पता हो, तालीम हो, पढ़ना लिखना वो जानते हों। तो इसलिए ये तो बिल्कुल ही मतलब जो है बिल्कुल जायज़ भी है और वाजिब भी है कि मुसलमानों पर भी और मुसलमान हुकूमत पर भी कि उनके जो माइनॉरिटीज़ है, नॉन मुस्लिम्स, उनकी तालीम का इंतजाम किया जाए। बल्कि ये भी उनको इख्तियार जाए कि अगर वो अपने तालीम का अलग से इंतजाम करे, उनके लिए जो है फंड्स वहाँ गुजार किए जाए। और इसका सबूत हमें मिलता है कि मुसलमानों ने जो है मंदिरों के लिए ग्रांट्स दी थी और वो तालीम के लिए ग्रांट्स देते थे, ब्राह्मण्स के लिए ग्रांट्स थे, तो उसको मदद माश कहते थे। ये तो ये जो इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट में बरसगीर में भी हुआ है और बाकी जगहों पर भी ऐसा ही हुआ है, इसको बिल्कुल उनके लिए इसका जवाज है और ऐसा होना तो बिल्कुल मतलूब है। और मैं इसको मुअल्लिफ़तुल क़ुलूब के दायरे में भी रखता हूँ और इसको उलमा ने भी बहुत हद तक इस तरफ ध्यान दिया है कि उनको तालीम के लिए पूरी मदद की जा सकती है और उनकी जितनी भी ज़रूरत, क्योंकि तालीम जब अब आज के ज़माने में तालीम के साथ रोज़गार जुड़ा हुआ है। अगर आप किसी कम्युनिटी को आप तालीम से महरूम रखेंगे, समझना चाहिए कि आप उसको रोज़गार से महरूम रखें, इकोनॉमिक डिप्राइविटी का शिकार कर रहे हैं उसको आप। इसलिए तालीम इस वक्त तालीम नहीं है। जैसे इमरत हसीन ने कहा है कि आज के ज़माने में आप अगर लोगों को पैसा दे देंगे, उनको दौलत दे देंगे, उनको प्रिविलेजेस देंगे, तालीम नहीं देंगे तो उनको डिप्राइव रखने का एक जरिया है। इसलिए जब तक आप तालीम किसी कम्युनिटी को नहीं देंगे तो उसके इकोनॉमिक राइट्स पर आप डाका डालते हैं, उसके सोशल राइट्स, पॉलिटिकल राइट्स और उसके जो बाकी राइट्स है उन पे आप डाका डालते हैं। तो इसलिए ये कैसे हो सकता है कि जिस इस्लामिक स्टेट ने इतनी ज़्यादा प्रोटेक्शन नॉन मुस्लिम्स को दी है, वो उनको तालीम से महरूम रख के उनके जो बाकी हुकूक है उनसे उनको गाफिल करे, क्योंकि ये आपस में इंडिपेंडेंट सब राइट्स, तालीम के जरिए से ही आदमी कॉन्शियस हो सकता है अपनी राइट्स के लिए। इसलिए बिल्कुल इसका जवाब है।
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Hamidullah Marazi Sahab, for such a wonderful lecture. Now we will proceed further. And the next lecture in this session is to be delivered by Professor Ubaidullah Fahad Sahab. And the topic is Islamic State in the modern world. I request Professor Ubaidullah Fahad Sahab to please start his lecture.
رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My dear friends, I will speak on the Islamic State in modern times. What will be the nature and scope of Islamic State, and how Islamic State is different from other system of government, and how it is applicable to the modern times. But before giving some outlines of Islamic system of government, I would like to go back to the Western history, because the modern system of government is mainly rooted in the Western ideology, Western culture and civilization, and Western customs and traditions. For example, this democracy, the most popular form of government, as defined by Abraham Lincoln, government of the people, by the people, for the people. This has its roots in the Greek philosophy. During the Greek, there was a concept of direct democracy, defined and elaborated by Plato and Aristotle. The direct democracy concept was that people used to gather in each and every town, discuss the matters, and then decide in consultation with each other. It was possible because the populations were very not so large, and they may easily get together and discuss the matter. But now, in modern times, it is not easy to apply this term democracy. Now, instead of direct democracy, the system of representative democracy is introduced and practiced throughout the world. This direct democracy, as applicable to Greek period only, as are discussed by Plato and Aristotle. After that, there was another phase in the Western political thought, that we can say that after the direct democracy, there was an age of theocracy. Theocracy is defined as a set of system of government, a set of law, system of government introduced and implemented in the society on the name of God. A group of clergies, theologians, namely used to be the sovereign in the spiritual matters as well as in the temporal matters. There was no separation. There was no division of power. Both the powers, the temporal powers as well as the spiritual powers, were in the hands of the Pope. And the rulers, the temporal rulers, they used to rule the people, rule the country in the name of the Pope. They received the instructions from the Pope as the words of God and implemented in the society. This is theocracy. But there is a period when this ideology of theocracy was replaced by the separation of power. When there was a bloody conflict between the rulers and the Christian followers of the Pope, and finally, in modern times, in the 17th, 18th century, when the movements of Reformation and the movements of this Renaissance started in the West, a popular phrase, secularism, was used, that religion rests with the Pope, with the Christians, with the Christianity, and the state rests with the rulers, with the temporal authority. So there was a division of power in between the two institutions. From here, more accurately, the government now was introduced on the basis of the separation of the three main institutions, that is then the parliament. This division between the three, it was introduced latest first in America, then in France, and then other parts of the world. The American Revolution is historic in the history of political thought, which was introduced in the first half of the 18th century, where America became the first power ideologically in the field of democracy. But more importantly, the French Revolution, which was introduced in 1789, that was the bloody and violent revolution. It provided some more details, some more shapes of democracy, and introduced the basic human rights, fundamental rights to the world. This a very brief history of democracy in the West. If you go to the history of West, you will find that this democracy, this autocracy, this theocracy may not be applied to the Islamic system of government. Unfortunately, the Western educated intelligentsia of the Muslim world, they introduced concepts, some new ideologies, some new systems, borrowing from the West, and implemented them in the Muslim world. This created so many problems. This is called the borrowed methodology, borrowed ideology, borrowed culture and civilization. because Western society has its own ideologies, has its own background, its own culture and civilization. In that very specific culture and civilization, some system of government work. If you West, we have to borrow the entire culture and civilization and ideology from the West. It does not depend upon us to select, to choose one and to leave other. Either you reject the West in toto, or you have to accept the West in its entirety. This is the position. Because there are differences between the Western cultures and civilizations and the Islamic cultures and civilizations. Let me introduce some basic fundamentals of Islamic system of government and then see how it is different from the Western democracy or different or Western theocracy. For example, the first very important point while dealing with the Islamic system of government is the relationship between the creator and the created. The relationship between the government and the power. The government is different, power is different. Power always belongs to the creator, Almighty Allah, who is the only sovereign. They introduce some system of government. They are created as the agent of God to implement the will of God on this earth as the Khalifa, the vicegerent. The relationship between man and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the relationship of Abd and Ma'bud, the master and the servant. The human beings are created as the servants, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the master, only master. The human beings have no such powers as far as the Islamic concept or system of government is concerned. They are the agent, they are the vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are empowered in the society because these powers themselves are not the powerful. They themselves are not the sovereign. This is the difference between the Western concept of democracy and the Islamic system of government. Then the second point, very important, is that in Islam, the government is basically an employer. The government is an employee and Allah is employer. It is the duty of the government to implement the message of Islam, that is Sharia, in its entirety, and the government is not free to make laws from its own to sanction the rights and duties from its own. It is bound to do as Islam, the Sharia, the Islamic Sharia desires. And this has been very clearly defined in the Holy Quran. You will find in Surah Al-Imran, for example, very famous verse recited by each and everyone. وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. This word minkum is very important. You must be turned into a people, a nation that calls to the goodness, that commands the good, that forbids the wrong. And these are the people which were entitled by Holy Quran as the prosperous, of having secured the falah. The word falah is also very important. Falah not only applies to the deliverance on the day of judgment, but it also equally applies to the prosperity, to the success in this world also. So in this world, the progress, the development, the success is possible only when the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim nations as a whole, perform its duty assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is Da'wat ila al-Khair. They are entrusted to call the people to good, command the good, to forbid the evil, to forbid the wrong. This is the mission that has been described in the Holy Quran, the mission of Muslim Ummah as a whole. Another very important verse, it is in chapter Al-Hajj, verse number 41. The Holy Quran says, Allah مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر ولله عاقبة الأمور. Very important verse. The companions are defined as that. These are the companions of the Prophet who in Makkannahum fil ard, if they are given the power in the earth, they will establish the prayers, they will manage the payment of zakah, they will command the good, they will forbid the evil, and everything finally returns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in case of power given to the Muslims, the duty of the Muslims as a part of system of government is entrusted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very clearly in this verse. So, government, according to the Quranic perspective, is not an employer, it is employee. Its duty is to perform the mission of Islam, to convey the message of Islam by all means to the humanity. After having practiced Islamic law in their personal life first. The third very important point in this regard is that as Imam al-Baqillani, Imam al-Baghdadi, Imam al-Mawardi, Imam al-Ghazali, and all the political thinkers have pointed out that this system of government is based on the revelation that is supported by the reason. There is a combination, best combination between the revelation and the reason, between the wahi and the aql. The wahi is supposed not to oppose the reason, and the reason, if neutral and free, will always support the revelation. So this combination between the two should be reflected in the system of government also. Then another point discussed by our great scholars is that the government should run by those who are able to govern. What is the ability of the governance? It has been discussed in the chapter An-Nisa, verse number 58. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addul amanati ila ahli. Allah commands you to deliver the trust to those who are the trustworthy. The quality of being trustworthy, Ameen, was inherited by the Prophet of Islam even before the prophethood. He was called by the Qurayshites as Sadiq, the true, and Ameen, the most trustworthy. So this trustworthiness qualifies all the basic requirements of a successful system of government. Every human being who is created and who has some qualifications is not entitled to rule. There are certain qualifications that must be possessed by those who are in the power. That's why Maulana Maududi, Maulana Hamidul Ansari Ghazi, and some other scholars of modern period of Islam, they have discussed this trustworthiness in its political and social scenario. The next point dealing with the Islamic system of government is that the government is basically a kind of allegiance made between the ruler and the ruled as part of ita'at. The Holy Quran says in chapter An-Nisa, verse number 59, Ati'ullah wa ati'ur Rasul wa ulil amri minkum. Obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obey the apostle, and obey those who are in power. Here the word ulil amri minkum. Minkum clearly defines the Muslims, that those who believe in the ideology of Islam, they should rule the government, they should rule the society. But this ruling the society is subservient to the itaat of Allah and itaat of Rasul. Obedience to the rulers is not unconditional. It is conditional to the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the obedience of the messenger of Allah, that is Rasul. Any system of government, any legislation, any judicial power which go against the orders of God or orders of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is treated as invalid, because the itaat of ulul amr, obedience to those in power, are subject to the obedience of Allah and the apostle. That's why the style of the Holy Quran, if you go to the literary style used in the Holy Quran, you will find why the word ati'u was not repeated with ulil amr. It is repeated only Allah with Allah and the Rasul. Ati'ullah wa ati'ur Rasul. Follow Allah, obey Allah and obey Rasul. Again, it is not said that ati'u ulil amri minkum. The word ati'u are not used. Why? Because ulil amr are included in the category of Allah and Rasul, subject to the obedience to Allah and His Messenger. So any legislation made by those in power, if it is in violation to the clear-cut commandments of God and His Messenger, will be violated, will be invalid. Another point, as far as the Islamic system of government, is that is shura. The government must run through consultation. Consultation on every level. This consultation is defined by some scholars in terms of democracy also, democratic process also. The Holy Quran says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, Surah Ash-Shura, verse number 38. This qualification has been defined by the holy companions, by the believers, true believers, that they run their affairs with the consultations. And in another verse, the Holy Quran has commanded the faithful to do consult in all and every affairs of the state and society. In Surah Al-Imran, verse number 159, the Holy Quran says, فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. This verse is very interesting. It was revealed after the Battle of Uhud. And we know, as a student of Islamic studies, that in the Battle of Uhud, there was a confusion about whether the war is waged while living in Medina city or an attack from outside should be started. This was an issue discussed by the holy companions and the Prophet of Islam. The Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam was of the view that we should defend from inside, while the young generations who did not participate in the Battle of Badr, they were of the opinion that no, we should attack the enemies. Now we are no more weak, we are powerful. When this discussion was going on, the Prophet ﷺ went to his room and fully equipped with all these military dress. He came out and said, okay, go on. We will fight from outside. This democratic spirit of the Prophet of Islam was implemented by him. He did not implement his own judgment, his own opinion. Rather, he implemented the majority of the opinion. And we know in that Muslims were defeated. The holy companions were disheartened that perhaps because of their insistence on their personal opinion, this position was reversed. In that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the faithful through the holy companion that فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Pardon them and seek forgiveness for them and consult them in all the matters. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And when you decide collectively, then rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only and implement it strictly. There is a controversy over the position of Shura, whether it is binding or not, whether the head of state has veto power or not among the scholars. The majority of the scholars are of the opinion that the Amir, the head of state, has the veto power, and majority decision would not be binding upon the head of state. But as I have discussed these things in detail in my writings, I found that this is not correct. The Amir, the head of state, has no veto power and he is bound to act according to the majority opinion of the Shura. It is the matter of discussion that what is the jurisdiction of Shura? Whichever is decided already in the Holy Quran and in the traditions of the Prophet, that doesn't come under the jurisdiction of Shura. It will not be discussed in the Shura. It is already decided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is already implemented by the Prophet of Islam. This is not the jurisdiction of Shura. For example, no individual, no ruler, no parliament, no legislature, no monarch is entitled to discuss the payment of zakah in Shura or parliament. Payment of zakah is obligatory. It is already implemented. We may discuss only the details of how the mode of the payment, how it will be collected, how it will be implemented. But as far as the obligation of the payment of zakah, it is already defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not the jurisdiction of the Shura. Another point, very important, dealing with the Islamic system of government is the government must be always just. That is, it must be equipped with the adalah, justice. Justice is one of the basic fundamentals of Islam.